Thanks for that introduction, Bob. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I suppose I'd better introduce myself to those of you who don't know me. Obviously, you know my name because it's Jack. I spent 34 years working in Swindon Works as a shop office clerk, and I started on the F shop, which was a blacksmith shop. We had 13 steam hammers pounding up and down. And from then on, I went on into the chair foundry and the iron foundry, and eventually I ended up in the main offices where I shuffled around from one office to another and gained my experience. But that's enough of that. Now, before we delve into my talk, can I say that this presentation has been in collaboration with Martha Parry. It was while she was researching the complete boundary of Swindon Works that this story unfolded as we went along. And my talk is about the southern boundary of the works, while Martha is continuing with the east and the western boundaries, which covers Rodbourne Road and White House Road, which is the extremities of the wall as we know it. There's several other photographs on the presentation tonight, and you'll be seeing those as we go along. So, right, why is it called the Great Wall, and what does it represent? Well, not so much as in the military sense or the architectural sense, but it is in one respect, it's the DNA of Swindon. That's the way I look at it. And as such, it represents the struggles of generations of Swindon families who played out their disadvantaged lives living and working in an industrial environment in the second half of the Industrial Revolution. They were not privileged with the benefits of modern society that we are today, and as you shall see, they had to carve out of the community that they had created the structures of governance to give themselves health, education, social facilities, so that they could improve their quality of life. They also lived through 2 world wars, and for 143 years, they brought industry and employment into the Greenfield site, and in so doing, created the Swindon we have today, and for that reason, if for no other, I think they are worth remembering. And as long as the Great Wall stands, it will be their reminder. So, Joseph Armstrong, the Great Wall of Swindon. Now, before unveiling the Great Wall of Swindon, I think it would be appropriate to say a few words about Joseph Armstrong, the man who built it. Of course, it's not just any old wall, it is in fact the outside walls of his carriage workshops, 1868 to 1875. This is the man, and in my opinion, Armstrong has been greatly underestimated. Not only was he an intuitive engineer, he was also sympathetic when it came to the social and working conditions of the men in the factory. He was energetic when it came to improving safe working conditions. He supported the Mechanics Institute, the Sick Fund Society, the Medical Fund, and was a prime mover in the opening of the Medical Fund Hospital in 1871, which is where we are now. This was the hospital of 1871, which he inaugurated. He was chair of the New Swindon District Council when it was set up in 1868. And for the first time, people had the opportunity to elect their own local councillors, freeing them from the direct control of the GWR Board of Directors. Sadly, after a short illness, he died very young at 61 and is buried in St Mark's Church. However, during his term in office, he had turned Swindon Works into a fully self-supporting engineering company. He really brought it forward. So continuing with the Great Wall of Swindon, sometimes referred to as a curtain wall, it separates the railway cottages from the main London to Bristol railway line and the factory, which lends itself to the meaning of the term inside. It flows like a ribbon of masonry through the heart of the railway village from the west to the east, beginning as a trickle at Rodbourne Road with a low wall of pennant stone. It continues towards the station. Its western section is waist high and fronts the vicarage and St Mark's Church. It then reaches its full height as the boundary wall of the carriage works and the sawmill built by Joseph Armstrong beginning in 1868. However, the complete wall, including the remaining listed workshops forming the eastern section, runs from the Army Reserves through the whole length of Church Place, Bristol Street, Emlyn Square, which includes the Works Tunnel entrance, then on to London Street, Shepherd Street, before continuing to the station where it was completed in 1876. But since then, of course, it continues on down to White House Bridge, and then it continues on down to White House Road, but that's another story, and that's up to Martha. The building of these workshops meant the villagers no longer had open views of passing trains and of the works. Now, this picture, I've got mixed feelings about talking about it now because I'm supposed to be talking about the war. But obviously this encompasses everything, and it's the basis for most of my talks because there is so much history in this. And what you're looking at here is a painting of 1849 by a chap called Edward Snell, and it shows you the railway village on the right here. If you can see my arrow, I don't know if you can, that's the railway village, and the railway works here. And this was in 1849, and this is the footprint that greeted Armstrong when he arrived at Swindon in 1864. Now, when he arrived, of course, there had been additions made to the workshops in the way of machinery and plant, but the footprint remained the same. And I'll take you through this. So if we're looking at the bottom of the picture, this is Rodbourne Road along the bottom here, and we come to the London to Bristol main line just here. This is a broad gauge line, by the way, and there's a broad gauge train on the station. There's two of these paintings, one 1846, got a short broad gauge train on the up line. This is 49 because it's on the down line. And so if we continue looking to the right, this is GWR Park, Farringdon Road Park, where we are now, but at this time it was called the cricket field. And if I zoom in, you might be able to see, if you've got good eyesight, why they called it the cricket field. Because these little dots here, these are cricketers. That's a cricket pavilion. And this guy here is a wicket keeper, and there's the batsman, and these are the fielders. So that was called the cricket field, and it's now called Farringdon Road Park. And here we have Church Place, continuing up round here, and up round to the railway village. And along the top here, this is Farringdon Road. And of course, as you can see, there's not even a hairdresser there, or not even a nail shop. I mean, you've only got to look. And so that meant that these people had to be completely self-sufficient. So the way they did it, I'll zoom in again. If you just look down here where my arrow is, these here are allotments. And this is how the early settlers of New Swindon managed to sustain themselves. And of course, they also had livestock in their small front gardens here, chickens and rabbits, etc. But they were completely isolated, self-sufficient, no doctors, no post offices, no nothing. So it was quite a primitive sort of existence. And then looking along the top here, this is the Wilts and Berks Canal. And joining it here, you have the North Wilts Canal, if you follow my arrow along, and it continues along the top there. So they're completely surrounded. And at the top there, we have Swindon Station. And this is Swindon Works, and where the arrow is now is Brunel's first workshop This was called the A shed at the time, and this is where locomotives would change here, because the route from London to Swindon was comparatively flat, but when you got down past Swindon, down to Bristol, etc., it got a bit up and down, so they had to change locomotives, and that was his first workshop, and that opened in 1843. This building here, I'll zoom in for you. This is the main office building. It's still there now, but of course it's been greatly enhanced. But in 1845, this is what it looked like. You had the watchman's offices at the end here, and the offices itself that served the works was this little bit here, and this is where Gooch had his office, where the bit in the middle was the general stores. And here you have the blacksmith shops, and this building here was what we called the B shed. That's been demolished now, and it's blocks of flats. But you might be interested in this building here because it's still there, and that is the Steam Museum. And these are the steam hammer shops around here, and this is where I worked in those shops there. So I've taken you through that scenario, so that you should be familiar with bits of it. But we're talking about the wall, and this is where it starts. It starts down the bottom here at Rodbourne Road, down here at the bottom of Rodbourne Road, continues along Church Place here, and here is the vicarage. If I zoom in, there's the vicarage, there's the church. This is the very early school, 1845, and you can see children in the playground there with a maypole, etc. And so this is where the walk goes along, and it comes here to Bristol Street, goes on to London Street, Shepherd Street at the top there, and then it goes into Station Road up here and finishes up at the Station Road. And as you can see, this is wide open. These are gardens here. And this is the works manager's house just there. This is where Armstrong lived when he first arrived. And that house there is a station master's house. But another thing of interest, I think, are these buildings here. You have a job to see what they are. But it just wasn't an ordinary greenfield site when the railways arrived in 1841. This, in fact, are the houses and the cottages of the North Wilts Canal. And the North Wilts Canal comes along here, and these were their premises when the railways arrived. So it wasn't completely barren, although most of it was green fields. So I think we've gone through that enough, so we'll move on. And I'm showing you this picture now, because this is the Mechanics Institute. Now, the Mechanics Institute, it was a central building of the works. It was for the governance of the village. This is where the committee meetings used to take place. And this is where the railway village really developed from this building here. And this is very early. This is before 1868, because in 1868, this area here was built up. And so you wouldn't have been able to see it, and it was blocked off. And at the background there, you can see the market which the settlers set up for themselves so they could get fresh meat, etc. And also you can see that on here you haven't got the spires on top of the towers, and of course it's greatly extended since then. You've got a theatre, etc. on the back. So that's a very early photograph of the Mechanics Institute, and I think quite important. Now, getting back to the wall, this is where it starts. We've got Rodbourne Road behind us, and this is the low pennant stone wall that goes along Church Place. You have the Army Reserve there. You have the vicarage behind the bushes there, and at the top there, through the bushes, the trees, you can see St Mark's Church. So we continue down there until we come to Bristol Street. Now I'm showing you this map. We've jumped forward now. This is 1900, but the wall starts there, which we've just seen, and it continues down Church Place into Bristol Street, London Street, and this was where Compton's and Webb's used to be here, and it continues down to the station, but now it continues on to White House Bridge, which is just there. And of course this was the development of Swindon Works, but these are the carriage workshops of Armstrong, just there. And this little section here is interesting because it's quite historic. This is where the first school was built, 1845, and there's St Mark's Church, and there's the vicarage. So that's quite an interesting little bit of an area there. We're continuing now just to look at the wall, because it's grown in height now, and this is the back of St Mark's Church, of course, and that's Church Place, but you can see the wall is beginning to rise. So now we'll go back to my text after ad-libbing, and we're talking about St Mark's Church now, 1845. St Mark's Church, together with the vicarage and the school, was built 1845 for a sum of £8,386. It seats 800 worshippers. As you will see, the front of the church in those days faced the railway, while today it's on the other side facing the park. And of course the reason for that, of course, is the cemetery. The cemetery became full, and so they turned it the other way around. Now, its consecration was on the 25th of April 1845, and it was attended by 10,000 people, while the population in New Swindon at the time was only 800. And this was done by building a temporary train platform opposite the church where the train could stop. A large marquee was set up in the park where a sumptuous banquet was held, attended by the bishops of Gloucester and Bristol, along with the GWR directors, businessmen and military personnel. The graveyard contains the graves of the Ray family, William Gooch, and an obelisk and a grave for the Armstrong family. So the church is well documented. The vicarage was built in 1846 under the same budget as the church. And we know the first vicar was the Reverend Mansfield, Joseph Mansfield. He preached services in a room somewhere in the works before the church was built. However, he left Swindon in 1850, but before he did, he unsuccessfully tried to make church attendance as part of the school curriculum. Now, this is a picture of the church printed in 1845 in the London Gazette, and it shows the church facing towards the railway line, and you can see that there's no cemetery there in use at the moment, a bit too early, but now of course it's changed and it's facing the other way, and this is the view you get today, looking at from the park, and they built on a new porch and they put on the spire, I think, and so it changed radically over a period of time. And now you're looking at the vicarage, 1845-46. This is now a child's nursery, and this is the path where the vicar would lead, and he would approach the church through those gates there, and through which is now the cemetery. So now we go back to my text, and standing close to the church, the company built its first school in 1845. Schoolmaster Alexander James Braid settled in with his wife and daughter, who both taught at the school. Acting as secretary to the Mechanics Institute, Alexander Braid produced posters showing that events were held in the school, as there were no other premises were available in the village or in the works. Swindon was expanding rapidly. Between 1861 and 71, the population had doubled and outgrown the old school classrooms. Classrooms were being held in the Mechanics Institute and the Drill Hall, which is the Army Reserve, which held 200 boys. Then, in 1871, a new boys' school was built on the corner of Church Place, while in 1856 an infant school had also been built in the area. Later, in 1873, the company built a school for infants and girls in College Street. In 1881, the school board, Swindon School Board, in association with the GWR, built a new boys' school in Sanford Street, allowing the company to use its Church Place school for company purposes, where it became the works laboratory. Of course, limescale, going off the track, being the biggest enemy of locomotives, it was here that analytical tests were made of water to be used in their boilers. It also analysed copper, iron and steel, and of course it tested paints, varnishes, oil and grease, not forgetting coal, all vital ingredients for the safe working of the railway. So this is the first school built at the end of Bristol Street and the church at the background. This was built in 1845, and you see some lads standing in front of it. It soon become outgrown, and extensions and new premises were required. But during that time, this is one of the brochures or one of the posters that was produced by the school teacher Henry Braid, or Alexander Braid, and he done this in the school because there were no facilities anywhere in the village for social functions or social events to be held. But now, switching forward a great deal, this is an aerial shot, but what we're looking at here, if I can zoom in, is down the bottom. We can give you some idea of what I'm talking about. These are the schoolrooms that we've just been looking at, but this is in 1880. And you can see that the original school is long gone. But in its place, we see these buildings that have been erected. And this long building here, this was the road vehicle shop. This is where they built their road wagons, carts, etc. And then later, it became the works drawing offices. And there were 6 drawing offices in the works, and this was one of the earliest drawing offices. And of course, later on, that also became the works fire station. And so the fire station was here, and it remained here up until the works closed. And I think it must have been erected in here somewhere about the 1870s when Armstrong came. This was the boys' school, and this was the infant school of 1856, I think. And these buildings here, these are the sawmills, and you'll be hearing a little bit about that. And of course, you can see here the water tower and at the beginning of the carriage shops and the sawmill as we go through. So now we go back to my text, and we talk about the road motor and vehicle shops, drawing office and fire stations. The demolition of the original school in 1879 allowed the company to build road motor vehicle shop where coach bodies and carts were made. In 1900, this shop housed the works 6 drawing offices for locomotives, carriages, wagons, machinery, buildings and furniture until the building of the new buildings by Churchward in 1904, when he built the drawing office that we now got on top of the main office block. Finally, it was occupied by the works fire station until the works closed in 1986. Now, the first fire engine of 1869 was a Merryweather and was it was horse-drawn and steam-operated. There were no fire stations at that time. By 1912, this was replaced by the Dennis motor fire engine, which can be seen in the Steam Museum, but other replacements followed, as can be seen in old photographs. Fire drills and first aid fire competitions were regularly featured in the calendar of Swindon Works since early GWR days. Made up of volunteers, staff would have to attend classes in their free time to qualify for the team. Regional competitions would be held annually, and Swindon teams regularly featured in the top medal winners. Fire Brigade, Sid Smith, Pam Whitworth and Pam Howie were victors in these events, and you'll see the photographs in a moment. Today, the old fire station contains the University Technical College, where students study courses of technology and engineering, science and digital technologies. Next door is the high-level water tower of 1870, 70 foot high, cast iron structure with double tank of 41,000 gallons. The original metal tank was replaced with the current plastic one during refurbishment. This high pressure tank served the carriagework sprinkler system and the fire station. It is believed to be one of the first industrial units in the country. So we go back to the photograph. This is the view from St Mark's Church, and this is the back of the road vehicle shop, which later became the fire station and was the drawing office earlier on. And this is the interior. These are the road vehicles that were made in the shops. As you can see, timber was used. And we're taking another view now from an aerial shot. And this is the building that we're talking about running along there. And of course, there's the water tower, and this is the sawmill. And we're coming along Bristol Street in this area. And another view now, this is nothing directly to do with the wall, but this is the main offices. And the reason I'm showing it, because these are church wards offices on the top of the buildings there. We've got that wall there and another one running along there. They are the church ward drawing offices built in 1904. And this is the interior of church ward's drawing office, and you can see all this stuff, all this material was made in Swindon. All these girders were made in the foundries, and it was used, direct labour was used to build these drawing offices. And this is also a feature in the hydro. If you go to the hydro now, where the refurbishment is taking place, a similar structure was used there. The hydro was built by direct labour, and it was stuff from the factory that supplemented it. So we'll be talking about that, and you'll see photographs of it. In fact, this is it. This is the large swimming baths in the hydro, taken, I've forgotten when, long before my time, but you can see the girders up there. They were made in the works, and this is now being refurbished even now. Talking about the works fire engine, this is the first fire engine, 1869, Weatherby, horse-drawn, steam-operated, of course. And another thing about this, which I believe to be correct, I believe this is London Street. And the reason I say that is because in the background there, I think that is Armstrong's house, where he lived until, of course, it was demolished to build the carriage works along there. But I think that was a manager's house at the time, and it was Armstrong who brought in these fire engines. Jumping forward, we can see this is the 1912 fire engine. This is now in the Steam Museum, and in the background you can see the fire station, previously the road vehicle shop, etc. And talking about Swindon's supremacy in winning shields and cups, this is the firefighting team that went into the fire exhibitions up in London and won these plaques. And this is Sid Smith, the fire manager. Here we have Pam Whitworth and Pam Howie. These people, contemporary with my time, I've worked with these people and sort of know them. And you can see an old fire engine in the background there, which was after the 1912 one. And a feature about these fire engines, of course, is they had to be very low cut because you had the tunnel entrance and it had restricted height. And so the fire engines had to fit and be able to travel beneath the tunnel entrance. And looking through the gate now, this is how we see it. This is the Works Fire Station as it was, and this is now the UTC, University Technical College, which is on the footprint of the original school of 1845, and you can just see the entrance of the wall there as it comes round into Bristol Street. Also in that area, this is the water tower, 1871. This was to provide water for fire prevention, for fire protection, and it supplied the sprinkler system that went through the workshops. And you can see it's got a very tiny little tank on the top there. This is plastic, the other one originally was steel. And there you can see the UTC in the background, and the wall starts to curve round. If you stand in the park, this is the view you had of the water tower in those days, and you can see what I'm talking about with a large tank on the top. And these are the school buildings of those days. And this is a picture from 1870. So now we're going to talk about the sawmills and the car body shop and the sawmills. And Armstrong had already built the carriage body shop, which was up and running when he decided to place the sawmill at the end of the shop, close to the water tower, with the supply to the sprinkler system. Because what happened at that time, he built shops, but he realised he needed a sawmill. So what he had to do, he had to chop a bit off the carriage body shop and turn it into a sawmill. And a huge amount of timber was used in the construction of the carriages, as you'll see when we look at the photographs. And yet, it would be another 100 years before steel carriages were introduced. In fact, 6 types of wood were used to build a carriage. Teak was used for the body panels, and it needed 15 coats of French polish and 5 coats of lacquer to make them weatherproof. The GWR sourced their timber worldwide, and I can't stress that enough. Train loads would arrive with pine and oak from the Baltic, white pine and sycamore from Canada and America, mahogany from the tropics, jarrah, and exceptionally hardwood from Australia, would all arrive at Swindon by the train load. Now, sawdust and shavings was a product of the sawmill, and it accumulated in large quantities and was extracted from the shops by a cyclone system and was taken to the works boiler station, where it was burnt to provide heating for the factory and to generate steam to drive the machinery. Gas, water, electricity was supplied to the hydro via a service tunnel under Farringdon Road from number 4 shop, now filled in with liquid concrete. So this is a section of the map that I've taken out just to show you what we're looking at. This is Bristol Street, the sawmill is there, there's the water tower, and this is the road vehicle shop, although at this time it looks as though it's a drawing office. So that gives you some idea of what we're looking at and what part of the town we're in. And this is the carriage body shop going on towards the tunnel. And here's another view of it, and you can see the plastic tank on the top, and we can see the hose drying system is now moved over on the left side. It was on that side before, and this was the sawmill, and of course this is Bristol Street going down in that direction. And to talk about the timber again that I mentioned, this is just one picture. I've got many more, but somebody advised me to take them out, so I'll take them out. So you've only got this one to look at. But just look at the amount of timber that's coming in on those trains. Just look at the logs there. And these have been sourced worldwide. Just look at the size of these logs here and these timber balks here. And there's another train there, loaded with balks and timber. But look at the timber on this side of the track. You've got balks there, you've got bolts down there, and it stretches right into the distance. And in the back there is Swindon Works there, and this is Newburn House where Churchward lived, and you had the timber drying sheds in that direction there, and their timber would be stored there for 5 years while it seasons. Now, I would have loved to show more photographs of this, but people say, it's boring. But anyway, here's another one. Oh. Well, you've got to be honest, haven't you? So this is Swindon Works in the background there, and just look at the timber down there. These piles were as high as a house. They were the height of the gutters of the housing, and this covered acres. You had the MSWJ railway in the background running along there, running to Andover, to wherever it went to, and there's Churchward House in the background there, and St Mark Church over there. But this is the volume of timber that they were using. It was huge. And now this is a photograph taken 1892 in Bristol Street. This is in the sawmill in Bristol Street. And this was taken by A.H. Harmon, I've forgotten his name, the brain goes to pieces. A.H. Harmon, 1892 anyway. And what happened in 1892 was that the broad gauge came to an end, and we accepted that what we call the narrow gauge, but everybody calls standard gauge. But at that time, the Reverend, whatever his name is, went round the factory with a camera and he took photographs. And this is the sawmill. It's just one of the sawmills with 12 blades. And look at the size of that timber log in there that they are sawing into planks. And that was a sort of work that was done at the end of Bristol Street. Absolutely huge, heavy lifting, and quite a big industry. And this is the interior of that shop. This used to be part of the carriage building shop, but then they hived it off and made it into the sawmill. And if I zoom in, you can see the well, with a bit of luck, you can see the sawmill that we've just been looking at, which is that thing there. There's the ramp that takes the logs and it goes through and comes out the other side. But look at the timber that's being used and look at the number of men that are being used. All these are carpenters and they're all got their own specific job. Many types of timber was produced in shapes and sizes. And here's the foreman, the gaffer with his bowler, and this was in Bristol Street. And so that is the sawmill, and this is where the sprinkler system would come through, and that was the purpose of the water tower, to protect this in case of fire. We're talking about the cyclone, and this is the cyclone that used to remove and extract the sawdust and the shavings from the workshops here. It would be loaded into wagons, and the wagons would be shunted over to the works boiler stations where they had huge boilers, 8 boilers all the way along. And that would produce energy for the factory and heating and steam for steam hammers, etc. And this is Albert, and this was taken in 1948. And Albert stayed with the works until it closed in 1986. He used to cycle past my house on the way to the outlet village when he retired, and I knew Albert quite well. And he was quite an elderly gent when he was riding his bike at that time, but wasn't as old as me. So we now look at the photographs on the text that I've just spoken. This is 1968, and you can see the cyclone system had gone by then. And this was the sawmill. But even then, in 1968, I can remember this, that workshop had closed. And this was the main carriage building shop when Armstrong arrived. But of course, we turned to metal carriages, steel carriages. Sometimes in the 1950s, they switched from timber to metal carriages. And all these workshops then were at risk. And this was empty. And this, by 1968, I can remember they were talking about converting it into a car park and forcing an entrance in there, which they've done now. The entrance is in the wall just there, but the windows are still up there. So this is Bristol Street, and there's a tunnel entrance there going down to London Street. Looking down Bristol Street, the opposite direction, and you can see the water tower there with its metal tanks on the top, and that was the fire station at that time. Here we are looking at the tunnel entrance. You can see how narrow it was, and the fire stations and the works ambulance, their own ambulance, used to access the works through the tunnel entrance. This is the interior of the carriage body shop before, of course, it was closed. I think it was in 1868 it was built, and this was taken 10 years later, apparently. But here you can see that they're using timber, wooden bodies, and these are the doors and the division, because the women were employed in this. This is what we haven't touched on that yet, but the women were employed in French polishing, and they used to do the panels and the doors and wooden items that were required for carriage building. Oh God, there's something there. Never mind. Now, this is an interesting photograph. This is the tunnel entrance to the tunnel under the railway village leading into the hydro, and it's just inside that workshop you were looking at. A moment, if I can just go back. No, it's not there. Just inside the carriage body shop that we're looking at, on the right, was this cabin. And in the cabin, this was the entrance to the tunnel into the hydro, or the baths as we called it then, and it would supply the electricity and the gas. And some people said it used to supply water to the swimming pools, but that was probably earlier on. I shouldn't think it would have happened in this day, because this was 1986. And I think the baths by that time was getting their supply from the Swindon Water Supply Company. So at this time, this was a service tunnel, and it's now been filled in with liquid cement. And this is a photograph, the only one I can get, and I'm grateful to Martha for this one, because it's a very blurred image, a screenshot of the interior of the tunnel, and you could just about scoop it down and walk through. But look at the size of those pipes going through there. These are gas pipes, or maybe water pipes or sewage, I don't know, but these are service pipes. And all this pipe work would have been made in the Swindon Works in the K shop. And there's a little guy down there doing a little bit of maintenance work. So that went beneath the railway village, beneath Rodbourne Road, up into the hydro. And to show you on the map what we're looking at, this is it here. This is, these are the workshops that Armstrong built, and this is the tunnel. There it is, it's coming under Bristol Street, Northampton Street, Exeter Street, Taunton Street into the hydro, which is there. Something happened there. So we're showing you this map again, I don't know why, but this is where the wall is, and this is where we're up to there, number 4 shop. This is where the tunnel went under the railway village, and the wall continues along there until we come here. Compton's and Webb's used to be the factory there for the uniforms, uniform factory there, and the wall then continues over the North Wilkes Canal onto the station and continues down to White House Road, which is there. Right, work tunnel entrance, you've missed that sheet, I'm sure you're very disappointed. Never mind, things happen when you're 91. But now we're looking at, we're now going to talk about the works tunnel entrance, because it's quite an important aspect of it, at least I think so. The works tunnel entrance, also known as the main entrance, opened on the 5th of February 1870. It's 300 feet long, 15 foot wide and 7 foot high, so it's quite restrictive. And when you remember that's the main entrance to the factory, where you need the fire engines to go through, the ambulance to go through, and anything else that needs to go through, there's quite a restricted amount of space. And up until this time, lives had been lost by men crossing the London to Bristol line to get to work. And this is the purpose of the tunnel. The tunnel was built to give men free access into the work, because there has been so many tragedies, especially in the winter. They started work at 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and over the time of history, men had been knocked down and killed while just going to work. You know, so I mean, this is why the tunnel had to be built. The dangers of crossing the line, especially in the dark, foggy winter months, had been raised in the press and in Parliament. However, in later years, the lack of height meant that vehicles needing access to the works had to be less than 7 foot high. So all the works, fire engines were specially made, and the ambulance. The windows on the left were the GWR savings bank. I'm going to talk about that when we look at these photographs. So we'll do it now. So, forget that. This is the main tunnel entrance. This now is Eminent Square, and this is a photograph about 1906, I think. And the thing to notice about this section of the wall is this tunnel entrance here, the apex there. This was one of the works' drawing offices. There were 6 separate drawing offices in the works before they were moved into that large building. And this was one of them up here. But if you look at it now, this is all bricked up and built up. And these were the offices of the works. This was the works savings banks in the 1890s. It later become the privilege ticket office, which was where railwaymen would get their railway tickets from that office there, rather than queue up at the station and cause frustration with people queuing up behind people getting free passes. And the watchman's office was there, and these are the beginning of the finishing shops, finishing and trimming shops. The carriage building shops was over this side of the tunnel, and then they moved over there by Travisser to the finishing shops, which are over here. This is face on to the tunnel. This is quite recently, of course, showing how it was done. I think this was done up for Princess when she arrived. My brain's gone off again. And the watchmen were on that side, and of course the tunnel entrance is about 300 feet long. And there's the interior of the tunnel, how it looked after they refurbished it with the closure of the works in 1986. They then had the heritage buildings in there, and they refurbished the tunnel and made it look very posh. Now, we're going to talk about the finishing and fitting shops, which are important. These were mainly finishing shops built by Armstrong in 1874. The upper level included fitting doors, windows, panelling, fixing seats, blinds, floors, coverings, and painting, which was done by the men, for the carriages. While the lower level was built for women, and this was quite an important aspect of the works. For the first time, women were being employed in the works. Here, they had separate entrances from the men with their own toilets, facilities, and restrooms. Many women went into French polishing as a skilled trade, because it was a very skilled trade, mainly working on carriage doors, but also on furniture and most anything made of wood. It was in these shops where they worked on the finer aspects of coaches, such as door panels, which, being made of teak, was one of the important jobs requiring many coats of polish and lacquer to protect against the weather. But their work was also entailed interior fittings such as window frames, luggage racks, compartment partitions, and most wood fittings that could be done on their workbench. They were also employed on soft furnishings, sewing and trimming shops. There were machine-sewed hand towels, curtains, head covers for seats, cushion covers, the netting for luggage racks. The laundry was another area offering employment to women. Industrial-sized machines would be kept busy with work from hotels, stations, workmen's overalls from around the regions, etc. Now, this is what we're talking about. These were the finishing shops. Behind this wall here were the traversing tables that brought the carriages across from the carriage body shops to the finishing shops, and the finishing shops were on the top there. I think this part here, towards the tunnel entrance, I think was a mess room in about the 1880s anyway, because in those days, men, their working day began at 6 o'clock in the morning, and of course they needed a break. But I think there's a photograph, and I should probably have to talk about it on there. But the women were in these shops on the ground floor on here. This was French polishing and sewing, etc. And so it was quite innovative for women to have a job. And this is a pristine photograph recently taken by Martha. And as you know, we've had a great deal of expenditure done on these premises now. There's been £20 million spent in this area on refurbishing these buildings. And these are the buildings where the women worked. And now this has been modernised, it's high-tech stuff, and it's occupied by the University of Bath, the University of Oxford. There's the Innovation Centre, which is sustainable, works on sustainability industries. There's the Create Studios, and so these have been brought up to modern standards, very high technical quality indeed, and is open for people who wish to use it for their facilities. And as you can see, the environmental improvements have been made. The roads have been recovered. The pavements have been widened. They've had and trees planted. And so these have been refurbished to a very high standard. And you realise that they are 150 years old. And if you have a look at some of the masonry that's been done there, that they've replaced broken stones, etc. It's very high quality. This is a photograph of 1924, and it shows the women in the French polishing shop in London Street. And on their benches you can see the doors and the windows and the partitions. And this was a different kind of work for the women. And you don't hear much about it, but it also brought them into contact with industrial diseases, because French polishing was very injurious to skins, and women, that they had all sorts of ailments. And this is where the medical fund came in, where they could use those facilities. But it wasn't all sweetness and light, just giving women jobs, because it was a very hazardous job. You're dealing with different chemicals that are injurious to human beings, and these women suffered with dermatitis and things of that nature, which you don't hear anything about. I can't pick it up anywhere, but without a doubt they did, because I've worked with French polishing and know what it's capable of. And this is another shop, also London Street. These are the sewers. This is in the sewing room, and this is where girls or women are making curtains and soft furnishings, cushion covers, headrests and things like that. And this was in London Street also. The workshops are still there and being used now for modern purposes. But this again, 1924, and here we are. The GWR was very proud of this lady, Mrs. Robinson. She was the oldest living or oldest working person in the laundry. She'd been there for 34 years. But look at the size of those hydro extractors. And you and I, we call them spin dryers. But I mean, I couldn't fit that in my kitchen. But I mean, just have a look at it. I mean, they're huge. And you can see behind her a basket full of linen that's come in by passenger train and be delivered to the laundry. And it used to come in from all the way around the region and be dealt with here. And I'm sure there's other laundry women hiding behind those hydro extractors just so that Mrs. Robinson can have her photograph taken. Because I mean, look at the number of machines that are there. I can see 6 of these hydro extractors or spin dryers, but there was a lot more machinery as well as that. And this laundry, it moved over to Bristol Street or White House Road in 1931. This one that's up on the screen now, this was the carriage and wagon trimming shops, and it was here where they're doing the soft furnishing. This is horsehair here, so obviously, and these are seats for stations, waiting rooms, hotels, etc. And so this was all done in the upstairs rooms, upstairs workshops in London Street and Station Road in that area. But you can see the quality of work that was done, the flush furnishings that were sort of used. And so that was the work that was done in that particular workshop, probably done by the men, I should think. This is a grisly-looking group taken up on the Traverser Road. These are the painters, where they painted the carriages. And so these are painters, I think, from 1880 or something like that. So it's a group of painters there from those days of wooden carriages. This is the mess room I was referring to, and this is in London Street, close to the tunnel entrance. And as I was saying, the men had a 12-hour day. They started at 6 o'clock in the morning, crossing the track in a winter's foggy, dark blizzard, being run down just to get into here. And what they used to do is start at 6 o'clock, but before they started work, they would come into here and they would put their tea caddies on the place where they were going to sit, and they would have their lunch boxes, or tough boxes, as you call them there, and they would have a tea break at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that would be for 3/4 of an hour, and they would rush in and they would have their place to sit because they'd already booked it. So that would save them a few minutes having a tea break at 9 o'clock in the morning, having worked since 6 o'clock. An interesting feature along the top here, we've mentioned the water tower, which was installed in 1870-71. And this is the sprinkler system that went throughout the workshops because, of course, there's so much wood and timber and sawdust and shavings. It was a huge fire risk. And if you look through history, you can see other industries that had these devastating fires. And so it was then that Armstrong decided to put the water tower up at the end of the shop, which I think he'd forgotten at the beginning. So there's the mess room and the sprinkler system. And now I'm going to talk now, or no, I'm not, I'm going to read from my text, because I can't remember, about the artificial shops, number 7 shop, which was artificial limbs, and that was a big thing. And talking off the top of my head, I'm not that old, but I think the first ones they produced was 1874. They produced artificial limbs for a guy who had lost his ankles or his feet. I think it was down at Plymouth, when he was working on a ship, and there was a coil that recoiled and took his feet off, and they made his artificial limbs at Swindon, and that was 1874, and it grew into a massive thing. So I'll read my notes because they'll be more accurate. So shop activities changed over the decades. Once a mess room where men bought their own snacks and reserved a place to eat, shop activities did change. Artificial limbs, hands and feet had been made at Swindon Works since 1878. They were provided for employees who were injured at work. The practice is thought to have ceased with the introduction of the National Health Service in 1948, although repairs were continued until 1970 when the last man retired. They were made in the trimming shop number 7 in London Street. The craftsmen who made the limbs were one of the highest paid grades in Swindon Works and were classified as pattern makers. These articulated hands, you'll see them in a moment, and foot were made in the 1930s. In the 1950s, 7 Shop became the rehabilitation centre for injured railway staff. Machines were specially adapted to help staff who had become partially disabled through accidents and to regain the use of their limbs, while in so doing produce small items that could be used in the factory. So it was not just rehabilitation. In fact, they were producing small articles on punches and drills like washers, levers, and small artifacts that were needed for steam locomotives as a useful product for the works, even though they were, as we would say today, on the club. So they were working when they were disabled, and it was a great benefit. You'll see photographs of it. The machines consisted of vertical and horizontal drills, lathes, and hand presses that used to exercise their limbs, etc. These shops were also used as bike sheds for those who couldn't afford a car. So, of course, things changed constantly over 150 years. Bringing us up to date, we have recently witnessed a rolling programme by the Heritage Action Zone to breathe new life into these 1868 carriage works while work is continuing to upgrade the health idol. I think this is a tremendous thing. I can't get over it. This huge 5-year project, which has seen an investment of £20 million into the area, has witnessed the high quality regenerations of these workshops and have attracted a space for small businesses, which are occupied by Bath and Oxford universities, which I've already mentioned, with the Innovation Centre for Applied Sustainable Technologies, which I've also mentioned, and Create Studios, and the Royal Agricultural University Cultural Heritage Institute. And this, I think, is a remarkable achievement. This is why I don't like to rely on my memory, because I repeat myself. I've already said that once and I now have said it again. But anyway, so this is what happens to these buildings. We'll now have a look at some of the photographs. And this is a photograph taken in the 1950s in that workshop in London Street of the two artificial limb makers, the highest paid men in Swindon Works. And you can see the product of what they're making, and it's high quality stuff. And it continued after the NHS was set up for repairing their artificial limbs and prosthesis. And all these were made in Swindon Works, in that carriage shop, by those craftsmen that worked there, these highest paid craftsmen. And look at the limbs. These are all articulated where their fingers and thumbs and things move. But I think that is outstanding quality. And I wear one of these myself. And I'm not kidding you, mine is no better than one of these. Mine is like that. That's the sort of thing I got. And it's not much better than this. This is top quality here. And the one I got, by the way, if you're interested, I've been wearing it for 40 years, man and boy, still wearing it. Going down tomorrow to have it sorted out down at Oxford. Talk about a problem. These are articulated hands with fingers that move. And of course the feet and the toes and things like that. So this is the quality of work that you could see being done by those pattern makers, those craftsmen, those tradesmen in Swindon, in Oxford Street, London Street. And now, of course, after then, when the artificial limbs had finished, it was taken over by the rehabilitation centre. And these, it's a bit of a dodgy picture, that's the best one I can get, are the machines, and these are the guys who've got injuries to their limbs, and they are being rehabilitated while producing. So, I mean, it's always been put to good use, and these days are passed by now. So now, I'm going to read again now. This is an interesting little bit of section, I think it is anyway. Webb's entrance, 12 shop, carpenters and the coal walk going on down the wall, going down towards the station. And Webb's entrance was one of the many works entrances and was used by carriage and wagon workers. The workforce totalled about 4,500 in the 1950s. That's just in the carriage and wagon works, not the local side, not the stores, not the timber stores, not the outstation. Many of its shops had been heavily involved in wall work, and 12A, carpenter's shop, which you'll see in a moment, was classified as top secret, and the men signed the Official Secrets Act. It is where they produced the superstructures for the 50 midget submarines, which were used against the Axis forces in the Mediterranean. Don't know about you, but I can remember these, and part of my childhood. So these are midget submarines that were being built in Swindon Works in a height of high secrecy, and the guys were sworn to secrecy. This shop was partitioned off from the rest of the works for security reasons, and security was paramount. And to gain access to the works, each man had his own little badge, GWR railway badge, with his check number on the back. And you couldn't get into work, or you couldn't get into that workshop, or some of the other workshops, unless you had your identity thing. So we'll carry on now, and this is the road that I'm talking about. This is Webb's entrance there. These guys are coming out, lunch hour. You can tell that by the shadows. The shadows are going in that direction, which means the sun is midway up into the sky. So that's lunch hour. And this is Webb's entrance, so called because this is where carriage and wagon workers go to work through that tunnel entrance. But immediately opposite here was a timber merchant called Webb's, and Webb's supplied the GWR with vast amounts of cut timber, whatever it required. It just used to hop over the road, take a half a ton of that, and it would go through the door. And so this is the watchman's office here, but this is 12 shop, the one that we were talking about. This is top secret. You wouldn't get in there without your little badge. And this is where they made midget submarines. You'll be able to see one in a moment. And of course, it was just behind the wall. And the wall is still there. And that entrance is still there, very historic. So many top secret guys walked through that hole in the wall. And you can walk through there today and feel important. It leads up, well, you can, and it leads up to the station car park, and the station is down in that direction. So this is now Station Road, and the wall continues in that direction. And this is one of the midget submarines that was made in Swindon. Well, we've got to clarify that, because the whole of the submarine wasn't there. It was only the superstructure. And the superstructure was made out of teak. And of course, you needed to be special craftsmen to work in that sort of material. And this is the superstructure. And this is one of the photographs taken in the works. And you can see it's partitioned off and is shielded from prying eyes. And there's an overhead crane there for lifting it. So this is the sort of work, this is the war work that's being done in World War II to help win the war. And these submarines were used in the Mediterranean to sink in the Italian fleet, I think, if I remember correctly. And so it was quite important, the work that was being carried out there. And this is their identity tag. Here's the badge that the guy would wear. GWR, Railway Service. On the back would be his check number, so that he knew who he was. I don't know if you want to read that, I don't think you do, but that tells you what the arrangements were for the guys wearing this badge. And this was produced in the GWR, no, not the GWR magazine, another magazine during the war years when these badges were first mooted. And so they couldn't get to work without those. And they're still drifting about now. They come to the museum occasionally. And this is 12 shop, the carpenter's shop that I showed you on that plan. But this is very early on in the century, 1910, I think. So before even the First World War. And this is what it looked like. This would have been done on a Sunday because there's nobody about and they wouldn't allow the cameras in when the guys were working. So there's a Sunday photograph of the carpenter's shop in Station Road in 1910 with all the tools and accoutrements. And here we are. This is Webb's entrance. This is where the top secret guys went in, and that was where 12 shop was over the top there. All gone now. This is now a car park, and this is the wall continuing on down towards the station and down towards the coal wharf. So we'll have a little look at that and see how things are going there. And this is the coal wharf. And in here, the coal wharf, the coal wagons would come out for local deliveries. If you worked in Swindon Works, you were entitled to cheap coal and what they call old timber, which they had tons of old timber coming in because they were using so much of it. And we could buy it at £0.50 a hundredweight. I know just how much that is and how much it weighs, and you haven't got a clue. But I would have a wagon load of timber arriving at my front door, and the bloke would carry it around, and that would cost me £0.50, which was 12.5p. So I'd had a quarter of a ton of old timber and coal. We used to have coal delivered by the coalman, and that would be delivered by horse and cart coming out of there. And there was another coal wharf in White House Road, what we call Beatrice Street entrance. Now we call it Beatrice Street entrance, even though it's in White House Road. But the reason is because Beatrice Street was opposite. So it was Beatrice Street entrance for the workmen to get in and out of work on that side of the carriage work. I told you that's nothing to do with this talk, but I've just told you. So you've got some information for nothing there. So there's the coal wharf. And if you have a look at that wall, the way it's continuing, that wall is 150 years old, isn't it? And look at it, it's immaculate. So it's not crumbling or anything. So that's that. Now, I've got to do a bit more reading now, and it says here Swindon Junction Station, which is an interesting little bit. I think it is anyway. Swindon Junction Station was described in 1845 by the London Gazette as being 2 stations. Of course, they were clever in them, so it's just one now, one on each side of the line. It stated them to be second to none in the kingdom, and this is Swindon in the Greenfield side. And the hotel accommodation is of the most elegant and splendid description. You wouldn't think it was Swindon, would you? In the middle of a field, it's in the middle of a field. They communicate with each other by a covered passageway over the railway. Swindon Junction Station was so called because of its connection with Gloucester Line, at first opened as a temporary station with tickets sold at the Goddard Arms. It later opened in 1842, so the trains were running, but the station wasn't open. After the closure of Old Town Station in 1961, it became just plain Swindon Station, no more Swindon Junction. Sadly, Brunel's frontage of the original station and the ticket office was demolished in 1972 and replaced by the monstrous office block that we see today. So we'll have a look at some more photographs now over that point that I've been talking about. And here we are. This is the station forecourt, and this is the wall coming round. Now what happened? The station used to be level with the curb there, and so the wall finished here. But with the demolition of the station, they had to put a new section of the wall in there. But they're using the same stone, and this stone comes from the GWR quarries at Keynsham, Bristol. It's an oolitic stone. And so they had their own quarries there, and so they built new wall there, and they demolished the station and put the office block there. And the wall continues again. Oops, hang about. I don't know what happened, did I know? So this is what the station looked like before they knocked it down. As you can see, it's on parallel with the line, and that's the entrance to the platforms under there. On this side here, you have the parcel office and the telegraph office, and these are the booking offices. I don't know if anybody knows what that thing is there, but I'll tell you, I don't know as anybody old enough, but this is the newspaper vendor. This is where the advert guy used to stand, and the advert would be delivered to him there, and he would greet everybody coming off the train, and they'd all be queuing up to buy newspapers off of him. So that's the front of the station before it was demolished, and here's another view of it, 1972, one of my photographs, and that is the front of the station. There's the ticket office, the parcel office, and the telegraph office. So that has gone, and this is another one even earlier, the same view. This is the parcel office and the telegraph office, and there's the entrance to the station there. And this is Brunel's original stonework, and that was in 1911. I'm showing you this one now, an aerial one, and this is what's happened to Swindon Station. It's just that bit there. You have an island platform, and these are the main offices. This is the hotel, is it, I think? And what do they call themselves now? Great Western Railway, what they call themselves today, who now own this. They have promised that they are, Bob can talk about this, he'll tell you about that. They're going to develop the whole of that area, and Bob knows the whole story, so I'll leave that if he can mention it. Right, now then, we're going to go completely and utterly off the wall, off to a tangent, just because I want to. It's because it's one of my perks and my rights, and I'm going to do it, and you're going to suffer unless you want to walk out. But what it is, a couple of maps now. Swindon Works, 1968. Diesel engines and diesel multiple units were repaired and assembled at Swindon. Steam closed, depots closed, men laid off. There was no more work for these craftsmen. And what I'm talking about now is the impending closure of Swindon Works. It was very political, it was very heated, and it was all Margaret Thatcher's thought, nobody else. Margaret Thatcher caused all this mayhem. And I had this little bee in my bonnet, and I've outlived all of them. Nobody can argue with me now. And I was there, and I got my own opinion about it. So the steam closed, depots closed, men laid off. There was no more work for these craftsmen. Diesel engines remained in service 24/7 for 6 months before coming into service. So I've lost a page, absolute chaos. I've lost a blinking page, but anyway, we'll continue as though it hadn't happened. So what I wanted to say on my other page that I haven't lost is that the locomotives, steam engines from Swindon Works, which were labour intensive, built by craftsmen. You had blacksmiths, you had foundrymen, you had fitters, you had turners, you had erectors, you had carpenters, you had the whole lot building locomotives, steam engines, labour intensive. And a steam engine could only stay out on the track for 12 hours before it had to come in again because it run out of coal and it run out of water. So the steam engine at the end of the 12 hours come back into the running shed and you had a gang of men there who would pour over this locomotive. They would empty the firebox, empty the ash pan, empty the smoke box. They would clean out the grate. They would refill it with coal. They would refill it with water. They would light the fire again, and they would wait for it to get up to 250 inches per square inch pressure before the locomotive could even move. And that locomotive would be out of service for 12 hours while it was refurbished, rebunkered, and set to go into passenger service again. And that was why steam engines are so expensive and so labour intensive. Then overnight, not actually overnight, but overnight, we turned to diesel. Now then, diesels. The diesel engines come in and they remain in service 24/7 for 6 months without coming into a running shed, without being looked at, unless, of course, they broke down. And that is the difference. There was no water, no coal, no firing up, no foundries, no blacksmiths, no fitters, turners and rectors. All those trades had gone. Swindon had become an assembly and repair depot, employing 2,500 men. When I started, there was 14,000 of us. It was, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, it was technology that closed Swindon Works on the 26th of March 1986, along with many other workshops throughout British Rail. If you think about it, there was 13 separate workshops replicating everything done at Swindon: Darlington, Doncaster, Derby, Eastleigh, Glasgow, you name it, 13 workshops building steam locomotives and labour intensive. And suddenly the work dried up. So are you going to keep everybody in a job until they become pensionable, superannuation? So that's my bugbear. Anyway, that's what I'm saying, that I think that the railway industry folded up through technology more so than politics, although politics did play a huge amount into it. And there was so much trouble, there was so much suffering caused by the unemployment because they couldn't get other jobs. I mean, things could have been done in that direction. I'm not saying that that wasn't so, because there was a lot of hardship. Many of these people in Swindon never found work again because of their age and because of the jobs security that just wasn't there anymore. And so I think this is my take on it, that I think not only was it Maggie Thatcher, but it was also technology. Anyway, now, these are the maps that I was going to show you. No, I've just burbled it now. This is the full Swindon Works under steam production. These produce steam engines over here, carriage and wagons over there. And that changed overnight. I mean, this was wooden produced carriages. Now, these were wooden produced carriages. Suddenly we were producing steel carriages, and you lost 95% of your workforce on the carriage side because you were no longer using steel carriages, but you still had the loco side. Then come diesel, this is what happened. There's the full works, and this is the size of the works with the diesel. You can see you've lost the whole of the carriage side there. You've lost all of Armstrong's carriages down here. All these buildings are empty. And this was the diesel repair depots at Swindon. And so I've got acres more to show you, but I've been asked or been told that it's now time to call it a day. So I was going to take you through these photographs. I'll zip through. This is where we started. The low wall started there, and we passed the church, and this is the wall as it was. I've got to close down.
No.
Sorry, folk.
No, Jack, it's absolutely fine. We're not in a rush out, but if anyone does need to leave...
Somebody dies, so can anybody...
He basically says you can carry on, but if anyone wants to leave now, they
Oh,
can.
right, okay. Well, let's get back to this bit now. Yeah, so now these last photographs, I'm just going to wind up with these and just take you a quick trip through what I've been talking about. And this, of course, is Church Place, and this is the low pennant wall that we started with. There's the Army Reserve, and it goes on down to the church. And there's the church, and the wall, you can see, is rising in height as it comes up towards Bristol Street. And this is on Bristol Street, where the stonework curves round. And I'll just put that in to show you the masonry and the skill that these people used 150 years ago, because it's still like that now. And here we have the masons marked from 150 years ago on that oolite, on that stone that comes from the company's own quarries at Keynsham. This is just to show you the thickness of the base of the wall and why it's going to be standing for a long time. This is the entrance to the car park for the carriage workshops, but look how thick that is. And this is where the tunnel went under the railway village. And looking back on Bristol Street, you can see a good view of the wall there. This used to be the Priv office and the savings bank. And there's the water tower there. We've lost it. We've got a plastic one on the top. Used to feed the system. And there's the fire station right at the end of Bristol Street. And now looking in the other direction, to looking down towards London Street. And this is the tunnel entrance. The Priv office there. This used to be the drawing office, if you can remember that photograph with all the windows in, now blocked up. Now it's an attic, where they store stuff. Tunnel entrance there. Watchman's office there. These are the finishing shops, and these are the women's shop, and the mess room, and the riad, and the whatever the other one was. My brain switches off. This is an interior shot of the mess room that was. This was being done just a year ago or so. How heavy they went into it. It was a really massive job that they've done, and they refurbished those places. And you want to go in and have a look at it. White heat technology is in there now, and it used to be this. It's absolutely incredible. And this is Martha's photograph again of the exterior and the environmental improvements that have been made. £20 million spent in the area, not on here, on the whole of the area. That would be the Steam Museum in that area, and the hydro. Yeah, no, probably not. Just guessing. I had a stern look. But this is the innovation centre. This is what's happened inside, and there's a little story here. This is how they've modernised it now. I'll zoom in. These are offices that people can rent on short-term basis, and this is glass and chrome, etc. And this is just one of the rooms. But the thing to look at here is the floor. This floor is made out of wood, and this is teak. These are wooden inserts to carriage wheels. Now, carriages in the old days, 1845, now I'm talking, had wooden wheels. I mean, you wouldn't never imagine it, but they did, and we're going to show you one just to prove it. But this, when they switched over from wood to cast iron, or whatever they used, steel, there was acres and acres of this wood left. And the GWR didn't like to waste a thing, so they used it in their workshop floors. And these teak inserts, if you can see the shape of them, look, there we are, of that peculiar shape, they became part of the workshop floor. And I think these were used in the A shop, I'm not quite sure. But that's what happened because they had so much of this timber. And this is teak, very expensive wood. And now it's used in the floors in these buildings. And if we look here, this is one of the wooden wheels. This is 1845. And these are the teak inserts. And the story is that these were cast iron wheels, and the noise was so deafening in the carriages the passengers just couldn't take it. And so this guy called, what's his name, forgotten his name? Mansell. So this guy Mansell invented wooden wheels, and this is one of Mansell's wheels. And the rest of them are on the floor in the Innovation Centre. So that's a little story for that. This is another view looking back. And this is a good view because this is from London Street, and this behind this extensive wall here, which is very well made, this is where the traversing tables used to operate, and these are the carriage body shops, and these are the finishing shops. And so you have to get your carriages across that piece of, because that's a tunnel entrance there. So you needed something to bring the carriages over the tunnel entrance, and they done it with these traversing tables. And this is where the women worked. This is where they had their little domain, and where they did the French polishing, sewing, etc. And there's another view of it, looking down towards the station. And this is when we get to the end of, what do you call it, street? Shepherd Street. There we are, good eyesight. And this is where the women worked again down here. But this last piece, this was the laundry. This was where the laundry was until 1931, when it was moved off down to Beatrice Street. But this section now, I have to say, this is still waiting to be refurbished and restored. This hasn't yet been done, although the environment is, the environmental area, this area here, the roads and the pavements have been refurbished and are looking quite posh. But these workshops here, they haven't been dealt with yet, although there are plans for them to be done. So it's just a question of time. And this, of course, is where Compton and Webb's used to be, that gap in the map. This was a factory making uniforms, and the wall continues on down there. And there also used to be a hotel here, the Union Hotel, and I know because I used to pop in there for a pint after work when I was walking to catch my bus. So I did have a pint in the Union Hotel, which is long gone now. And so continuing on down to the state. Yeah, well, I've had it, ain't I? I ain't got a chance. I don't know where I am. Well, I don't know where we are now, so I'll call it a day.